Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Facebook Live, our Answers Special Education Today webinar. I'm Marnie McNiff, and this is Kevin Daly.
Good evening. We're here to talk about special education at a time when school is about to begin for the school year. With the new academic school year, there are some best practices for parents to follow. So we're going to talk about that. And a little bit later, we're going to talk about 3 little-known laws that parents of children with disabilities should know about because they are quite helpful. But first, getting ready for a successful school year. What are the best practices for parents to take? Marnie, what do you think about that?
So one of the things that I recommend is always to reach out to your team. I always made it a point to reach out in the younger years when they had one teacher, and then as they got older to the whole team, just to introduce myself, tell a little bit about my child. They're looking at dozens of IEPs for all of their students, and it's a good way to kind of start that conversation and start that relationship, to introduce yourself, introduce your child. I like to mention my child's strengths and weaknesses, and that I am always available. If the teacher has an issue or a concern, that I am a partner in this, and that I'm very much involved and will help in any way. So I think for me, that's always been a great way to start off the year, to kind of put my name out there in front of the teacher, put my child's name out there in front of the teacher, and give a little bit of an overview that maybe isn't necessarily on the IEP, in a little bit of a more personal way. I found that to be very helpful.
I agree. It's important to make that personal connection with the teachers and staff who teach our children. Of course, when your child is in elementary school and there's one teacher, it takes a certain amount of effort. If you have a child in high school who has several teachers, take some legwork and effort, more effort on the part of the parent, but it is worth it to have that personal contact. It is very good for your child.
Yeah, I agree. It's always been a big deal for me to make that email beforehand. And a lot of times teachers are in there the first few days before. So sometimes you can catch them before, but if not, and then they're pretty good about getting back to you, and just, having that type of communication is really important.
Another good step for parents to take to prepare for the school year is to get a full copy of your child's school records and read them, if you haven't done that already. And when you get those records, keep them all in one place. A good old-fashioned 3-ring loose leaf notebook is sometimes the best solution. And then read them. You may need some assistance understanding the test scores and the evaluations, but it's important to understand what's in the record, if only because it reflects how the school people regard your child. And it's important to know how the school people regard your child. Now, Marnie, I've got a question for you. Let's say you're a parent who ended the school year last year with a bitter pill to swallow. Let's say towards the end of the school year, your child went through the referral process and was found not eligible for special education. Or if your child is a special education student and you asked for a certain program or service and you didn't get it, something that you should aim for the first day of school and just to continue it? Or is it strategically important to take your time?
So gut instinct is always, let's fix this right away. But I think there is an importance to giving it some time. With a new teacher, they may see things that last year's teacher didn't see, but without giving the teacher ample time to get to know your child, it's very hard to have the discussion on what your child's weaknesses are, and where your concerns are when they haven't had a chance to get to know your child. So setting up an IEP, PPT rather, the first week of school isn't necessarily the best situation for those types of situations where you're trying to become re-eligible, or last year was not good and you want to fix goals and add services and things like that. There is a level of importance to giving the teachers some time to get to know your child. They can have a much better conversation coming from a standpoint of how your child has been in class, how your child is progressing, how your child is learning. And that doesn't mean wait 3 months, but a lot of times giving a few weeks for the service providers and teachers to get to know your child really will make a difference to having a productive conversation.
Yes, it will. And in the process, you may also find you have an ally with this year's teacher where you didn't before. An ally who can support what you want to accomplish if you're looking for eligibility or if you're looking for a program that you were unable to get before.
And that would be, would you agree that would be the same case if your child was changing districts and you kind of are trying to start over? Would you still recommend giving that time for the teachers to get to know your child before starting the process again with a new district?
Yes, that's important. And remember, folks, any decision that PPT team makes, whether it's eligibility or qualifying for a certain program or a service, the criteria are very clear. Decisions are based on a student's performance as measured by evaluations, tests and quizzes, and day-to-day performance in the classroom. Now, if all they have to go on is data from the previous year, that's going to work against you. If you have a new team or even just new members on your team this year, it's possible that could make a difference once they get to know you and your child.
Yes.
Another thing that parents can do to get the school year off to a good start is to join the parent group, PTO or PTA, that's in your child's school. It's important. A lot of our kids, they don't want to be in school. They don't feel like they belong. And that attitude is counterproductive. It's when students feel involved in school, when they feel that they're part of it, that's when they really take ownership and do better. It gives them incentive. And there's no greater incentive to a child for them to see their mother or father or both involved in a project that's sponsored by their school's PTO or PTA. It makes them feel like their parents, their family, they're part of the school too. It increases that feeling of ownership that the child has. And there are SEPTOs, special education PTOs, that are district-wide. If you have one in your community, it's important to join that group too. But a district-wide parent support group won't give you parent involvement opportunities that your local school-based PTO or PTA has. If you want to get into the school, if you want your child to see you involved in the school, if you want to get into that parent grapevine and learn the unwritten rules about your school, then join the parent group at your school. Pretty much every school has one.
Definitely recommend that as well. And there are many districts that have SEPTOs, special education PTOs too, and much different than a regular PTO, as you said, but can be really helpful to connect with other parents and learn about what's going on in your district in terms of special education and things that are available and things like that. I have been to several in the area, and I really feel like they give really invaluable information to parents on the special education process, understanding an IEP, understanding testing and things like that. So you can definitely get a lot of support from groups like that as well.
That's true. That's true. Something else to keep in mind at the beginning of the school year, this doesn't necessarily lead to success for your student, but it will lead to less regret for you. Expect school bus problems during the first few weeks of the year. This is something, as an advocate who works with a lot of parents, and Marnie, I'm sure you've heard it too, this time of year, every year, bus companies sometimes make mistakes. They don't pick up students. They're not where they're supposed to be, that kind of thing. Be patient with that kind of thing. It seems to happen every year. It doesn't happen to every student, but when it happens to you, it can be very, very aggravating.
It can be terrifying. It can be, just on a personal note, they lost one of my kids in kindergarten. Nobody could tell me where she was her first day. And it can be terrifying, but yes, you still have to treat everybody. Everybody's doing their job and everybody's doing their best. Nobody's trying to lose your kids. But yeah, definitely. And I think, in Connecticut too, we have a bus driver shortage. So if they're late coming home the first few days or getting picked up, that's to be expected. That's to be expected as the district is ironing kinks out with the bus routes and things like that as well.
And so many of our kids are dependent on special transportation. Yep. The bus factor is important to everyone.
Yes, definitely.
Marnie, how about just one last tip for starting the new year successfully, the new school year? And then let's talk about some laws, some little known laws that can be very helpful to parents of children with disabilities. But before we move on to that, what is one more tip that you would give parents at the start of the school year?
I'm a parent of teenagers, so my perspective might be a little bit different, but I think at the age where my kids are at, or middle school and up especially, I think it's really important that my kids know what their accommodations and services are. So with new teachers, if you are supposed to be allowed notes, or you're supposed to be able to take a test in a separate setting, and your child doesn't really know what's on their IEP, that can be a problem. Whereas if they are aware, then they're able to say, oh, I'm allowed to use my notes, or I'm supposed to take this in the resource room and things like that. So I did make it a point, as my kids got old enough to understand, that should be a part of my job, is making sure they know what's in their plan. And some school districts have gotten really good about going over that with students, which I think is amazing. But that is something that definitely is a big deal, because sometimes, things fall through the cracks. Teachers have a million IEPs and 504s, and they're looking at different accommodations for different kids. And if your child knows what they're supposed to get, I think that's definitely a benefit for them.
It certainly is. And there's a name for that. It's called self-advocacy. And it's important to encourage self-advocacy in our children. A lot of them, they have to learn how to speak up for themselves, maybe coming from years of having other people speak out for them. But that self-advocacy is important. And I'm reminded of a high school student I used to know, a girl with an IEP, who not only understood what was in her IEP, she would walk around with a copy of it. And whenever she needed something that was provided in the IEP, and there was any chance that she wouldn't get it, she would whip out the IEP and show it. And that's self-advocacy. That's
amazing. And a lot of kids would struggle with that, though. So one thing too that I have recommended to different clients is, if your child is not that child who can raise their hand and say, I'm supposed to use notes, or I'm supposed to go to another room for this, get them in the habit of sending an email before that test and say, according to my IEP, I'm taking this in a separate location. I just wanted to make sure you're aware. And that way they don't have to do that face-to-face conversation, which can be intimidating for some kids.
Yes, it can be. So those are some tips for starting a successful school year. And in our later Facebook Live events. We're going to have more tips for you as the school year progresses. I just wanted to talk about those three little known laws that can be very helpful to parents of children with disabilities. Actually, these three little known laws are very well known in some circles, but many parents are unaware of them. Now, none of these laws regulate special education. Two of them are general ed initiatives, and one of them isn't even about education. It's about healthcare. I'll start with that one. Marnie will put links to information about these laws in the chat. And the first one is the Federal Medical Leave Act, or the Family Medical Leave Act. A link to more information about that in the chat. This is a federal law enacted in 1993. FMLA applies to employees at government agencies, whether it's state, local, or federal, and any private business that normally has 50 or more employees for most of the year. Excuse me. FMLA allows eligible employees to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave from their job every year for family or medical reasons. An eligible employee can take an FMLA leave, as it's called, for up to 12 continuous weeks, or the time can be broken up and used intermittently. If you are eligible, you can take FMLA leave to take care of your child or another family member who has a serious health condition. Typical uses include doctor appointments, therapies, and making child care arrangements. And according to the U.S. Department of Labor, FMLA leave can also be used for time parents spend attending PPT meetings. This is important. There are parents who spend lots of time in PPT meetings. There are parents who need to take a personal day or a vacation day or even just a sick day to attend their child's PPT meeting. And even if their absence from work is excused, it can still lead to problems on the job. For example, I once knew a postal worker, a letter carrier, who was constantly getting in trouble for taking time off to attend his son's PPT meetings. He had a son with autism at a young age. They had many PPT meetings over the course of the year or so when this happened. He was written up so many times for taking time off to attend PPT meetings that it affected his eligibility for raises and promotions. In fact, he was close to being let go. Then he filed a grievance, and in the outcome, he was given assurance that FMLA would cover time missed for PPT meetings, and all the negative reports were removed from his record. So if you work for a state, local, or federal agency, or for a large employer, and you need time off to attend your child's PPT meetings, you should use FMLA to get that time off. And there should be no negative consequences without using your personal time, your vacation time, or your sick time. Follow the link in the chat that Marnie put in there to learn more about FMLA. The next law I want to cover is Title I. Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, called ESEA. And it's called ESEA because this is a law that has several names. It seems to change every time there's a new administration in Washington. It's also known as the Every Student Succeeds Act. At one time, it was called the No Child Left Behind Act. That's why people really prefer to call it ESEA, because that's the one name that seems to stick throughout the years. And Marnie will put a link with more information about Title I in the chat. Title I provides additional funding to schools in areas where poverty is a factor that affects the school's ability to educate its students. Now, obviously, not every school in America is a Title I school, but the last time I looked, more than 90% of the school districts in America had at least one Title I school. and we have many, many of them in Connecticut. As a condition for receiving this sweet, sweet Title I funding, all Title I schools must develop a parent engagement policy, a policy that calls for regular, meaningful, two-way communication between parents and school. The school policy must be put in writing, and it must be provided to all the parents in the Title I school. It's usually provided in the student handbook that comes out every year. Title I also calls for frequent progress reports, reasonable access to school staff, and opportunities for parents to volunteer in their child's class and observe classroom activities. How do you learn if your school is a Title I school? See the student handbook. It should be in there. So parents, if your child has a teacher who refuses to communicate with you, or if you asked to observe your child's classroom and you were refused, if your school is a Title I school, you can use the school's parent engagement policy to your advantage. Get that communication going. Observe that classroom. It's your right under Title I. The third law that I want to talk about is called FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And Marnie will put information about FERPA in the chat. FERPA gives parents certain rights when it comes to their child's school records: the right to privacy, the right to inspect and review school records. That includes IEPs, 504 plans, school evaluations, report cards, any record that's maintained by the school. If you discover false or misleading information in these records, FERPA gives parents the right to file a complaint, asking to amend the record. And if the school refuses, FERPA gives parents the right to challenge the refusal at a hearing with the State Department of Education. And if the state hearing officer sides with the school, FERPA gives parents the right to add a statement of their own to the record, which explains their side of things. Obviously, FERPA, it's a powerful law. And like the others, it applies to all public school students. It's not just for special education students. One more point about FERPA. FERPA does not give parents the right to get a free copy of their child's school records. Connecticut parents do have that right, and earlier we recommended using that right to get your child's school records and then read them. But this right doesn't come from FERPA. It actually comes from state law, specifically Connecticut State Statute 10-76. This part of the state statutes is also known as the Special Education Regulations for Connecticut. And I'm throwing in a fourth bonus law, which is 10-76. There's no extra charge for this, folks. So sit down and hold on tight while I talk about 10-76. It's important because 10-76 really encapsulates everything that federal law has about your special education students' rights and your school's obligations to them. And it's all there in one place. Marnie will put a link to 10-76 in the chat, and it's important to look it over. Now, it's under 10-76 that parents have the right to one free copy of their child's school records. And it goes on to say that the request should be made in writing. And these days, email is considered in writing. And once the request is received, the school has 10 school days to comply with the request. And that's any parent of a public school student can do that. Now, if you are the parent of a child with a disability, in that request, if you state that you need the records to prepare for a PPT meeting, the school has 5 days to comply with your request. So this is a powerful way of getting school records, and it's important to understand your child's school records. Like I said, these records describe how the school regards your child, and it's important to understand that. And it's important to understand 10-76. It's pretty much all your rights, all there in one place. And those are 3 laws plus a bonus law that I wanted to go into. These are little known laws, but in certain situations, think of my friend, the letter carrier, can be very helpful.
Definitely. And if you have questions about these laws or how they pertain to you and your children, I have also put our contact info, our email in the chat. You can contact us even after the Facebook Live has ended, and one of our staff members will get back to you and hopefully be able to answer your questions. If you are watching, or if this video will stay on Facebook after, so there's a lot of times people watch it after we're not live, please do reach out if you have questions regarding anything we've discussed tonight. The PATH staff members would be happy to speak with you.
Yes. And please join us on September 6th at 6:30 p.m. for the Answers Special Education Today webinar, which is going to feature the director of the Bureau of Special Education at the State Department of Education, Brian Klimkowitz. And we're also going to have someone from the Department of Developmental Services who's going to talk about a new program for transitioning high school students. So please join us.
Wonderful. And you'll see our notes, our reminders on Facebook about that event coming up. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you tuning in. Have a great night.
Okay, bye.